Question 1. Performance analysis shows that officers of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, responding to a call for service observed suspicious items in plain view within a vehicle parked on a public street in Nashville, Tennessee. The officers have a reasonable belief that these items are evidence of a crime. Considering the Tennessee Constitution and relevant MNPD policies, which of the following actions best upholds legal and ethical standards? Option A. Discussing the observation informally with other officers at the scene to gauge their opinions before deciding on a course of action. Option B. Delaying any official action or reporting of the observation to allow for further observation or to see if the situation develops. Option C. Immediately seizing the suspicious items from the vehicle based on the officer's reasonable belief that they are evidence of a crime. Option D. Documenting the observed items and the basis for the belief that they are evidence of a crime, and then proceeding to secure a search warrant from a magistrate before seizing the items. The correct answer is D. Documenting the observed items and the basis for the belief that they are evidence of a crime, and then proceeding to secure a search warrant from a magistrate before seizing the items. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligation to protect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act decisively while adhering strictly to the Tennessee Constitution and Tennessee Code Annotated, which govern search and seizure, and the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's, MNPD, internal policies regarding evidence handling and reporting. Failure to do so can lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action, and erosion of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and actions taken at the scene, including the basis for any belief that evidence of a crime is present, and then seeking a warrant from a neutral magistrate. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Article I, Section 7 of the Tennessee Constitution, which protect against unreasonable searches and seizures and require warrants to be judicially sanctioned and supported by probable cause. The MNPD Standard Operating Procedures, SOP, on evidence collection and reporting would also mandate this process to ensure the integrity of the investigation and admissibility of evidence in court. This ensures that any subsequent search is conducted under judicial oversight, safeguarding individual rights. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately seizing the items based solely on the officer's suspicion, without further legal authorization. This violates the constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, as it bypasses the requirement for probable cause and a warrant. Such an action would be considered an illegal search and seizure under both federal and state law, rendering any seized evidence inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach is to delay reporting the observation to allow for the potential destruction of evidence. This is ethically reprehensible and a violation of an officer's duty to investigate crimes. It undermines the integrity of the justice system and could constitute obstruction of justice. Furthermore, it directly contravenes MNPD duty to preserve evidence and conduct thorough investigations. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the observation with colleagues informally without documenting it or taking steps to secure the evidence or obtain a warrant. While informal discussion might be part of an initial assessment, relying solely on this without formal action fails to establish a clear chain of custody or legal basis for further action. It also risks miscommunication or the loss of critical details that would be necessary to establish probable cause for a warrant. This approach neglects the procedural safeguards required by law and department policy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the observed facts and circumstances that suggest criminal activity. 2. Assessing whether these facts rise to the level of probable cause required for a warrant. 3. Consulting relevant legal statutes and departmental SOPs. 4. If probable cause exists, initiating the warrant application process. 5. If exigent circumstances are present, e.g., imminent destruction of evidence, taking immediate legally permissible action to preserve the evidence while simultaneously initiating the warrant process. 6. Meticulously documenting all actions and observations. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a potential for increased citizen complaints regarding traffic enforcement in specific Nashville neighborhoods, Considering the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's commitment to community policing, which of the following strategies best addresses this emerging concern? Option A. Implement a citywide increase in traffic stops and citations to proactively address potential violations across all areas of Nashville. Option B. Analyze complaint data to identify specific patterns and locations, then engage directly with residents in affected neighborhoods to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop tailored enforcement strategies. Option C. Classify the increased complaints as a general increase in public dissatisfaction and maintain current enforcement levels without specific neighborhood interventions. Option D. Immediately increase traffic enforcement presence in all identified high complaint areas to deter violations and demonstrate a strong response to the data. The correct answer is B. Analyze complaint data to identify specific patterns and locations, then engage directly with residents in affected neighborhoods to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop tailored enforcement strategies. Explanation: the risk matrix shows potential for increased citizen complaints regarding traffic enforcement in specific Nashville neighborhoods. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the department's operational needs for effective traffic management with the community's perception of fairness and equitable enforcement. Missteps can erode public trust, leading to decreased cooperation and increased scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to ensure that enforcement strategies are both effective and perceived as just by the residents of Nashville. The best approach involves a proactive, data-driven strategy that prioritizes community engagement and transparency. This means analyzing the complaint data to identify specific patterns or locations where concerns are most prevalent. Following this analysis, the department should initiate dialogue with residents in those affected neighborhoods to understand their perspectives and concerns directly. This collaborative approach allows for the development of tailored enforcement strategies that address legitimate issues while also building trust and demonstrating responsiveness. This aligns with the MNPD commitment to community policing principles, emphasizing partnership and problem-solving with the citizens of Nashville. Ethical policing demands that the department not only enforce laws, but also do so in a manner that respects the rights and concerns of the community it serves. An approach that solely focuses on increasing enforcement presence in identified high complaint areas without prior community consultation is professionally unacceptable. This method risks exacerbating the very issues it aims to address by creating a perception of over-policing and alienating residents. It fails to acknowledge the potential for bias in complaint data or the possibility that current enforcement practices are contributing to the complaints. Ethically, this approach neglects the duty to engage with and understand the community's lived experience. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to dismiss the increased complaints as unfounded without further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to take community feedback seriously. It suggests an unwillingness to critically examine the department's own practices and their impact on the public. Such a stance undermines the principles of transparency and responsiveness that are crucial for maintaining public trust. Finally, an approach that involves implementing a blanket increase in traffic stops across the entire metropolitan area, regardless of specific complaint data or neighborhood context, is also professionally unsound. This is an inefficient use of resources and fails to address the localized nature of the concerns. It can lead to unnecessary enforcement in areas where it is not needed, potentially creating new friction points and further eroding community relations without a clear, targeted benefit. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis, followed by stakeholder engagement, collaborative problem-solving, and transparent communication. This iterative process ensures that actions are informed, responsive, and ethically grounded, fostering a stronger relationship between the MNPD and the citizens of Nashville. Question 3. Investigation of a deceased individual at a residence in Nashville, Tennessee, reveals a potential witness present at the scene who appears distressed but coherent. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the responding Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, officer? Option A. Secure the immediate vicinity of the deceased and contact the MNPD Homicide Unit or Crime Scene Unit to manage the scene and conduct the initial witness interview. Option B. Begin questioning the witness extensively about the events leading up to the discovery of the deceased to gather immediate details. Option C. Allow the witness to leave the scene after a brief, informal conversation, instructing them to contact the precinct later. Option D. Conduct a thorough, informal interview of the witness on the spot, and then proceed to process the scene independently. Correct answer is A. Secure the immediate vicinity of the deceased and contact the MNPD homicide unit or crime scene unit to manage the scene and conduct the initial witness interview. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of an investigation. The officer must act decisively while adhering strictly to the established legal framework governing evidence collection and witness interaction within the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's operational guidelines. The best approach involves securing the scene and immediately contacting the appropriate specialized unit, such as the MNPD homicide unit or crime scene unit, to manage the evidence and conduct the initial interview. This is correct because it ensures that the investigation is handled by personnel trained in proper evidence preservation techniques and interview protocols, thereby maintaining the admissibility of any evidence or statements obtained. This aligns with Tennessee law regarding the chain of custody and the constitutional rights of individuals, particularly the right against self-incrimination and the right to counsel, which are best protected by trained investigators. Furthermore, it upholds the MNPD internal procedures designed to ensure thorough and legally sound investigations. An incorrect approach would be to immediately question the witness extensively about the details of the crime, without first securing the scene or involving specialized units. This fails to prioritize the preservation of potential evidence, which could be compromised by the witness's presence or actions, or by the officer's own handling of the scene. It also risks violating the witness's rights if they are considered a suspect, or if the questioning is conducted in a manner that could be construed as coercive, potentially rendering any statements inadmissible. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the witness to leave the scene without obtaining any preliminary information or ensuring their availability for a formal interview later. This jeopardizes the investigation by potentially losing a crucial witness and their immediate recollections, which are often the most accurate. It also fails to comply with the MNPD duty to gather information and pursue all leads in a timely manner. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to conduct a brief, informal interview on the spot and then leave the scene without further documentation or follow-up. This lacks the rigor required for a serious investigation, potentially missing critical details and failing to establish a proper record. It also bypasses the established protocols for witness interviews, which are designed to ensure comprehensive information gathering and adherence to legal standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes scene integrity and legal compliance. This involves a rapid assessment of the situation, immediate steps to secure the scene, and prompt notification of the appropriate specialized units. Subsequent actions, including witness interviews, should be conducted by trained personnel following established protocols to ensure the admissibility of evidence and the protection of individual rights. Question 4. Comparative studies suggest that law enforcement officers often face situations requiring them to balance public safety with individual liberties. In Nashville, Tennessee, an MNPD officer observes a vehicle with a slightly obscured license plate and a driver who appears nervous. The officer initiates a traffic stop. After speaking with the driver, the officer has a general feeling that something might be amiss but lacks specific, articulable facts to establish probable cause for a search. Which of the following actions best upholds the legal and ethical standards for an MNPD officer in this scenario? Option A. Conduct a search of the vehicle based on the officer's hunch that something might be wrong, given the nervous demeanor of the driver and the obscured license plate. Option B. Detain the driver and vehicle for an extended period, without further articulable suspicion, to wait for a K-9 unit to conduct a sniff search. Option C. Inform the driver that they have the right to refuse a search of their vehicle and ask for their voluntary consent to search. Option D. Inform the driver that a search will be conducted due to the obscured license plate and the driver's nervousness, regardless of their consent. The correct answer is C. Inform the driver that they have the right to refuse a search of their vehicle and ask for their voluntary consent to search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal rights of an individual during an interaction. The officer must consider the potential for the individual to be involved in criminal activity, without infringing upon their rights to privacy and freedom from unreasonable searches. The Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, operates under Tennessee law and the U.S. Constitution, necessitating a careful understanding of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and consent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining voluntary consent from the individual before searching their vehicle. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. By clearly informing the individual that they have the right to refuse consent and that their vehicle will not be searched if they do not consent, the officer ensures the search, if conducted, is lawful and ethically sound. This aligns with the principles of community policing and maintaining public trust, as it demonstrates respect for individual liberties. Incorrect approach is analysis. Approaching the situation by conducting a search based solely on a hunch or a vague feeling of suspicion, without any articulable facts to support reasonable suspicion or probable cause, is a direct violation of Fourth Amendment protections. This approach risks the evidence being inadmissible in court and can lead to civil liability for the officer and the department. Another incorrect approach is to imply or state that the search will happen regardless of consent, thereby coercing the individual into agreeing. This is not true consent and is legally equivalent to an unlawful search. It erodes public trust and undermines the legitimacy of law enforcement actions. Finally, delaying the individual unnecessarily without a lawful basis, e.g., reasonable suspicion of a crime, to wait for a K-9 unit or a supervisor, hoping to create a situation where a search might be justified, is an abuse of authority. Law enforcement detentions must be based on specific, articulable facts, not on speculative hope or pressure tactics. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Assessing the situation for articulable facts that support reasonable suspicion or probable cause. 2. If such facts exist, proceeding according to established legal standards for stops, detentions, or searches. 3. If reasonable suspicion or probable cause is lacking, seeking voluntary consent for any searches, ensuring the individual understands they can refuse. 4. Documenting all interactions and justifications for actions taken. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, ethical conduct, and effective policing. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Nashville, Tennessee, overheard a conversation between two civilians that strongly suggested Officer Davis, a colleague, may have accepted a bribe. Officer Miller is aware of the seriousness of such allegations and the potential impact on public trust in the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Discreetly speak with Officer Davis directly to gauge their reaction and gather more information before deciding on any further action. Option B. Discuss the overheard conversation with other trusted colleagues to get their opinion on how to proceed. Option C. Immediately document the overheard conversation and formally report it to the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division and their direct supervisor. Option D. Ignore the overheard conversation, as it is hearsay and not direct evidence, and avoid potential departmental conflict. The correct answer is C. Immediately document the overheard conversation and formally report it to the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division and their direct supervisor. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a sworn officer of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, is presented with information that could potentially implicate a fellow officer in misconduct. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the officer to balance loyalty to colleagues with their sworn duty to uphold the law and departmental integrity. The potential for retaliation, departmental politics, and the impact on team cohesion necessitates careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. The best approach involves immediately and formally reporting the information through the established chain of command and to the Internal Affairs Division, IAD, of the MNPD. This is correct because it aligns with the Tennessee Code Annotated TCA and MNPD departmental policies, which mandate reporting of suspected misconduct to ensure thorough and impartial investigations. By following the proper reporting channels, the officer ensures that the allegations are documented, investigated by the appropriate unit IAD, and handled in accordance with due process. This upholds the principles of accountability and transparency within the department, protecting both the public trust and the integrity of the badge. Failing to report the information or attempting to handle it informally represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Such inaction can be construed as obstruction of justice or aiding and abetting misconduct, violating TCA statutes and MNPD policies that require officers to report violations of law or departmental rules. Furthermore, attempting to resolve the issue informally bypasses the due process afforded to all individuals, including the accused officer, and prevents a proper, documented investigation, thereby undermining departmental standards and public confidence. Another incorrect approach involves confronting the officer directly without involving supervisors or IAD. This is professionally unacceptable as it can lead to the destruction of evidence, intimidation of witnesses, or escalation of the situation, potentially compromising any future investigation. It also places the reporting officer in a position of acting as investigator, prosecutor, and judge, which is outside their designated role and can lead to biased outcomes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policy and relevant state statutes regarding reporting misconduct. Officers should prioritize adherence to these regulations over personal relationships or fear of reprisal. When presented with credible information of misconduct, the immediate and formal reporting to the designated investigative body, IAD, is paramount. This ensures that the investigation is conducted objectively and that all parties are treated fairly under the law and departmental procedures. Question 6. Assessment of the appropriate procedure for an MNPD officer when questioning an individual who is in custody and suspected of a felony offense in Nashville, Tennessee, considering the need to gather information while respecting constitutional rights. Option A. The officer can imply that cooperation will result in a more favorable outcome without explicitly stating the right to remain silent or the right to counsel. Option B. The officer must clearly inform the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before initiating any questioning related to the offense. Option C. The officer should wait until the individual has provided some incriminating details before formally reading them their rights. Option D. The officer should begin questioning the individual immediately to gather initial information and then provide advisements if the individual invokes their rights. The correct answer is B. The officer must clearly inform the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before initiating any questioning related to the offense. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an MNPD officer because it involves balancing the immediate need for information with the established legal rights of an individual during an interaction. The officer must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any information obtained is gathered lawfully and ethically, respecting the privacy and rights afforded under Tennessee law and MNPD policy. Failure to do so could lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly informing the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions that could elicit an incriminating response. This approach aligns with the protections guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Miranda v. Arizona, and is further reinforced by MNPD policy regarding custodial interrogations. By providing these advisories, the officer ensures that any subsequent statements are voluntary and admissible in court, upholding the integrity of the investigation and respecting the individual's constitutional rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer immediately questioning the individual about the suspected crime without providing any advisories. This directly violates the Miranda rights and Tennessee's procedural guidelines for custodial interrogations. Any statements made under such circumstances would likely be deemed inadmissible in court, jeopardizing the prosecution's case. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to imply that cooperation will lead to leniency, without explicitly informing the individual of their right to remain silent or their right to counsel. While attempting to foster cooperation is a legitimate investigative tactic, it cannot supersede the fundamental constitutional rights. This approach could be construed as coercive, rendering any resulting statements involuntary and inadmissible. A further incorrect approach involves the officer delaying the Miranda advisements until after the individual has already begun to answer questions about the suspected crime. This circumvents the spirit and letter of the law, which requires advisement prior to any questioning that might elicit an incriminating response. Such a delay undermines the voluntariness of the statements and their admissibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. When an individual is in custody or their freedom of movement is significantly restricted, and the officer intends to question them about a crime, the immediate and paramount step is to provide Miranda advisements. This ensures that all interactions are conducted within legal boundaries, preserving the integrity of evidence and the investigative process. If there is any ambiguity about whether an individual is in custody, it is prudent to err on the side of caution and provide the advisements. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that an MNPD officer receives an anonymous tip alleging their specific residence in Davidson County is being used to store illegal narcotics. The tipster claims to have personally observed individuals entering and exiting the residence with small packages consistent with drug trafficking. The officer has no prior knowledge of the residence or its occupants and has not independently observed any suspicious activity. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Initiate a preliminary investigation to corroborate the anonymous tip by conducting discreet surveillance of the residence and gathering any available intelligence before considering further action. Option B. Ignore the tip entirely as it is from an unverified, anonymous source and therefore lacks credibility. Option C. Immediately attempt to gain entry to the residence to search for illegal narcotics based on the anonymous tip. Option D. Contact the alleged occupants of the residence and inform them of the tip to gauge their reaction. The correct answer is A. Initiate a preliminary investigation to corroborate the anonymous tip by conducting discreet surveillance of the residence and gathering any available intelligence before considering further action. Explanation. Process analysis reveals that the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, operates within a framework governed by Tennessee state law and specific departmental policies. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential emergency and the requirement to adhere to established procedures designed to protect individual rights and maintain public trust. Misjudging the appropriate response can lead to legal repercussions, disciplinary action, and damage to the department's reputation. The best approach involves a thorough, yet efficient, assessment of the situation based on observable facts and credible information, followed by a decision to engage appropriate specialized units if the initial assessment indicates a credible threat that falls outside the scope of immediate patrol intervention. This aligns with MNPD general orders and Tennessee law regarding the use of force and the execution of search warrants, which mandate probable cause and specific authorization for intrusive actions. The ethical imperative is to balance public safety with individual liberties, ensuring that actions taken are both necessary and legally sound. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a search based solely on a citizen's uncorroborated suspicion, without further investigation or independent verification of probable cause. This violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Tennessee courts, which requires warrants to be based on probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Another incorrect approach is to delay action indefinitely once credible information suggesting a crime is being committed is received, as this could jeopardize public safety and allow evidence to be destroyed. Finally, attempting to circumvent established protocols by conducting a search without proper authorization, even with a subjective belief that it is justified, is a direct violation of departmental policy and state law, undermining the integrity of the investigative process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes information gathering and verification. This involves assessing the reliability of sources, corroborating information through independent observation or other means, and consulting relevant departmental policies and legal statutes before taking significant action. When faced with ambiguity, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal advisors is crucial to ensure compliance and uphold ethical standards. Question 8. Regulatory review indicates that a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, Officer is approached by a local news reporter seeking details about a recently initiated, high-profile investigation. The officer has some preliminary information, but is unsure of the exact protocol for releasing such details to the media. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in this situation? Option A. Give the reporter a brief, non-committal statement indicating that the department is aware of the situation, but cannot comment further at this time. Option B. Consult the official MNPD policy manual or contact a supervisor or the public information officer, PO, to determine the correct procedure for releasing information to the media. Option C. Provide the reporter with the preliminary information gathered, as it is factual and could be of public interest. Option D. Share the details of the investigation with a fellow officer who is not directly assigned to the case, to get their opinion on what can be released. The correct answer is B. Consult the official MNPD policy manual or contact a supervisor or the public information officer, PO, to determine the correct procedure for releasing information to the media. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, officer due to the inherent tension between departmental policy, the public's right to information, and the potential for misuse of sensitive data. The officer must exercise careful judgment to balance transparency with the need to protect privacy and prevent the compromise of ongoing investigations or the safety of individuals. The best approach involves adhering strictly to MNPD policy regarding the release of information. This means consulting the official MNPD policy manual or seeking guidance from a supervisor or the public information officer, PO, before disclosing any details about an active investigation. This approach is correct because it ensures that information is released through the proper channels, in a controlled manner, and in compliance with all applicable laws and departmental regulations. It prioritizes accuracy, prevents the premature disclosure of sensitive details that could jeopardize an investigation, and maintains public trust by demonstrating accountability and adherence to established procedures. The PIO is specifically designated to handle media inquiries and public information releases, ensuring consistency and adherence to legal and ethical standards. Releasing information directly to a local news reporter without authorization is professionally unacceptable. This action bypasses established protocols, risks the dissemination of inaccurate or incomplete information, and could potentially compromise an ongoing investigation by alerting suspects or witnesses. It also undermines the authority of supervisors and the PIO, creating confusion and potential liability for the department. Sharing details of the investigation with a colleague who is not directly involved in the case, even if they are a fellow officer, is also professionally unacceptable. While the intent might be to share information, it violates the principle of need to know and can lead to unauthorized dissemination of sensitive data. This can create rumors, prejudice potential witnesses, or inadvertently provide information to individuals who could use it to obstruct justice. Providing a vague, non-committal response to the reporter without consulting policy or a supervisor is also professionally unacceptable. While it avoids outright disclosure, it fails to address the reporter's inquiry effectively and misses an opportunity to manage public perception through official channels. It can be perceived as evasive and may lead the reporter to seek information from less reliable sources, potentially resulting in inaccurate reporting. The professional decision-making process for situations like this should involve a clear understanding of departmental policies and procedures. When faced with a request for information, an officer should first identify the nature of the request and the information sought. They should then consult relevant departmental policies, specifically those pertaining to public information, media relations, and the handling of sensitive case details. If there is any ambiguity, or if the request pertains to an active investigation, the officer must escalate the matter to their supervisor or the designated public information officer for guidance and authorization before making any statement or releasing any information. This hierarchical and procedural approach ensures that all information released is accurate, authorized, and legally compliant. Question 9. Consider a scenario where a citizen approaches a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, officer on duty, and asks for specific details about an ongoing investigation, including the names of individuals involved and the exact nature of the evidence being collected. The officer is aware that releasing this information could jeopardize the investigation and violate the privacy of those involved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Attempt to recall the details of the investigation from memory and provide the citizen with what the officer believes to be accurate information, as long as it doesn't seem too sensitive. Option B. Provide the citizen with the specific details of the ongoing investigation, including names and evidence, as the public has a right to know what the police are doing. Option C. Acknowledge the citizen's interest. Explain that specific details of an ongoing investigation cannot be disclosed due to legal restrictions and the need to protect the integrity of the investigation and individual privacy, and offer to provide general information about MNPD procedures or publicly available crime statistics. Option D. Politely but firmly refuse to answer any questions, stating that the officer is not authorized to speak to the public about any investigations. The correct answer is C. Acknowledge the citizen's interest. Explain that specific details of an ongoing investigation cannot be disclosed due to legal restrictions and the need to protect the integrity of the investigation and individual privacy, and offer to provide general information about MNPD procedures or publicly available crime statistics. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a conflict between a citizen's perceived right to information and the department's obligation to protect sensitive operational details. The officer must balance transparency with the need for operational security and the privacy of individuals involved in ongoing investigations. Misjudging this balance could lead to compromised investigations, public distrust, or legal repercussions for the department. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves acknowledging the citizen's request, explaining the limitations on releasing information due to ongoing investigations and privacy concerns, and offering to provide general information about departmental procedures or publicly available statistics. This aligns with Tennessee public records laws, which generally favor transparency but allow for specific exemptions to protect law enforcement investigations and personal privacy. By offering alternative permissible information, the officer demonstrates a commitment to public service while adhering to legal and ethical boundaries. This approach respects the citizen's interest without jeopardizing departmental operations or individual rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing the specific details of the ongoing investigation, even if seemingly minor, would violate Tennessee's public records exemptions related to active investigations. This could compromise the investigation, alert potential suspects, and endanger individuals involved. It also fails to respect the privacy of those whose information is contained within the investigative file. Refusing to engage with the citizen or dismissively stating that no information can be provided without any explanation is unprofessional and erodes public trust. While certain information may be exempt, a complete lack of communication or explanation is not in line with the MNPD commitment to community engagement and transparency within legal limits. Attempting to recall and relay information from memory without consulting official records or departmental policy risks inaccuracies. This could lead to the inadvertent disclosure of protected information or the provision of misleading details, both of which are detrimental to the department's credibility and operational integrity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such requests by first identifying the nature of the information sought. They should then consult relevant departmental policies and state laws, in this case, Tennessee public records statutes, to determine what information is legally releasable and what is exempt. If the request falls into an exempt category, the professional should politely explain the limitations, citing the relevant legal or policy basis without revealing the specific details of the exemption if doing so would compromise an investigation. Offering alternative, permissible information demonstrates a willingness to be helpful within established boundaries. Question 10. Upon reviewing the pay records for Officer Miller of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, for the past pay period, you notice a discrepancy in the calculated overtime pay. Officer Miller's base hourly rate is $28.50, and he worked 8 hours of overtime during the pay period, which concluded on a Sunday. According to MNPD policy and Tennessee state law, overtime is paid at 1.5 times the regular rate for hours worked in excess of 40 in a work week. Assuming a standard 40-hour work week, what is the correct total overtime pay Officer Miller should receive for these 8 hours? Option A, $285.00. Option B, $342.00. Option C, $427.50. Option D, $384.75. Correct answer is B, $342.00. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Nashville, Tennessee, involving the accurate calculation of overtime pay, which directly impacts departmental budgets and individual officer compensation. Miscalculations can lead to financial discrepancies, potential grievances, and erosion of trust between officers and the department. Adherence to the specific pay policies and Tennessee state labor laws governing overtime is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves meticulously reviewing the MNPD official overtime policy and Tennessee Code Annotated, TCA, Section 50-2-103, which outlines overtime compensation requirements for eligible employees. This approach ensures that all calculations are performed in strict accordance with established departmental procedures and state law, using the correct base pay rate and applicable overtime multipliers. For instance, if an officer earns an hourly rate of $25.00 and works 10 hours of overtime in a week, the overtime pay would be calculated as /10 /text hours /times $25.00 /text hour / times 5 equals $375.00 assuming a standard 1.5x multiplier for overtime hours beyond 40 in a work week, as per typical state regulations. This systematic and legally compliant method guarantees accuracy and fairness. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely on a general understanding of overtime without consulting the specific MNPD policy or state statutes. This could lead to using an incorrect overtime multiplier or misinterpreting eligibility criteria, potentially resulting in underpayment or overpayment. For example, assuming a flat 2x multiplier for all overtime hours, regardless of departmental policy or state law, would be a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to approximate calculations based on previous pay stubs or informal discussions with colleagues. This method lacks the rigor required for accurate financial record keeping and can perpetuate errors. It fails to account for any potential changes in policy or individual pay rates, violating the principle of precise compensation. A third incorrect approach is to only consider the total hours worked without differentiating between regular and overtime hours, or without verifying if the overtime was pre-approved as per departmental policy. This oversight can lead to incorrect calculations of the overtime premium. Failing to comply with the specific provisions of TCA Section 50-2-103 that mandate premium pay for hours worked beyond a standard workweek. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to financial calculations, always prioritizing official policy and relevant legal statutes. This involves 1. Identifying the governing regulations, MNPD overtime policy and TCA Section 50-2-103. 2. Obtaining accurate data officers' base hourly rate, specific overtime hours worked, and any applicable pre-approval documentation. 3. Applying the correct formula, ensuring all components of the calculation are compliant. 4. Documenting the calculation process for transparency and auditability. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the appropriate departmental authority or legal counsel is essential. Question 11. When evaluating a traffic stop in Nashville, Tennessee, and considering a request to search a vehicle, what is the most legally sound and ethically responsible approach for an officer to take regarding consent? Option A. Persistently ask for consent to search even after the individual has initially refused. Option B. Ask for permission to search the vehicle and proceed if the individual does not explicitly say no. Option C. Assume consent to search if the individual appears cooperative and does not object. Option D. Clearly inform the individual that they have the right to refuse the search before asking for permission to search the vehicle. Correct answer is D. Clearly inform the individual that they have the right to refuse the search before asking for permission to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal rights of an individual during an interaction. The officer must understand the nuances of when consent is truly voluntary and when it might be coerced, even unintentionally, due to the inherent power imbalance in a police encounter. Failure to properly assess consent can lead to the suppression of evidence and undermine public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and unequivocally informing the individual of their right to refuse consent before requesting permission to search. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and interpreted by Tennessee law. By explicitly stating that refusal is an option, the officer ensures that any consent given is voluntary and informed, not a product of perceived obligation or duress. This aligns with the principles of lawful policing and due process, ensuring that evidence obtained is admissible in court and that the public's rights are protected. Incorrect approach is analysis. Requesting consent without informing the individual of their right to refuse is ethically problematic and legally risky. It creates an environment where consent might be given under the assumption that refusal is not an option, thereby violating the spirit of voluntary consent. This approach could be challenged in court as an unreasonable search, as the consent obtained may not be considered truly voluntary. Assuming consent based on the individual's demeanor or lack of explicit objection is also a failure. The absence of a no does not equate to a yes, especially in a situation where an individual may feel intimidated or unsure of their rights. This approach bypasses the crucial step of obtaining affirmative, informed consent and risks violating constitutional protections. Pressuring the individual to consent after an initial refusal, even through persistent questioning, constitutes coercion. This undermines the voluntariness of any subsequent consent and is a clear violation of an individual's rights. Such actions erode public trust and can lead to the exclusion of evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal precedent. This involves understanding the specific legal standards for consent in Tennessee, which require it to be voluntary and informed. Officers should always err on the side of caution, ensuring clear communication and respecting an individual's right to refuse any search request. This proactive approach minimizes legal challenges and fosters positive community relations. Question 12. The analysis reveals that a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department (MNPD) officer, while off-duty and in their personal vehicle, witnesses a traffic stop involving a close personal friend. The officer knows the friend has a history of minor traffic violations, but is otherwise a law-abiding citizen. The officer is concerned their friend might be unfairly treated due to the officer's presence. Which of the following approaches best upholds the ethical and regulatory standards expected of an MNPD officer in this situation, according to Tennessee law and MNPD policy? Option A. Remain at the scene and observe the interaction, believing their presence might deter any unfair treatment without direct intervention. Option B. Immediately and discreetly leave the scene to avoid any appearance of impropriety or influence, and subsequently report the incident and their presence to their supervisor as soon as practicable. Option C. Ignore the situation entirely, as it is an off-duty personal matter and does not directly involve the officer's official duties. Option D. Approach the officer conducting the traffic stop and discreetly inform them of their identity and relationship to the driver, suggesting leniency. Correct answer is B. Immediately and discreetly leave the scene to avoid any appearance of impropriety or influence, and subsequently report the incident and their presence to their supervisor as soon as practicable. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, public trust, and the potential for perceived bias. Officers of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, are entrusted with upholding the law impartially, and their actions, even when off-duty, can significantly impact public perception of the department. The need for careful judgment arises from the imperative to maintain professionalism and avoid situations that could compromise their authority or create an appearance of impropriety, as outlined in MNPD Code of Conduct and Tennessee state statutes regarding public service ethics. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy that prioritizes departmental integrity and public accountability. This approach recognizes that even minor infractions or perceived favoritism can erode community trust. By immediately reporting the situation to a supervisor and adhering strictly to departmental policy regarding off-duty conduct and interactions with individuals involved in ongoing investigations, the officer demonstrates a commitment to ethical policing and upholds the principles of fairness and impartiality. This aligns with the MNPD emphasis on maintaining public confidence and the ethical obligations of law enforcement officers to act with integrity, even when not in uniform. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the situation as a minor personal matter, believing that off-duty interactions do not fall under departmental scrutiny. This fails to acknowledge the continuous nature of an officer's role and the potential for their actions to reflect upon the MNPD. Such a failure to report could be seen as an attempt to conceal a potentially compromising situation, violating the MNPD policy on reporting all relevant information to supervisors and undermining the principle of transparency. Another incorrect approach would be to use the officer's position to influence the outcome of the traffic stop, even if the intention is to be helpful. This constitutes an abuse of authority and creates an appearance of favoritism, directly contravening the MNPD's strict guidelines against using official status for personal gain or to improperly influence legal proceedings. This action would also violate ethical standards that demand equal application of the law, regardless of personal acquaintance. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely and avoid any interaction or reporting, hoping it resolves itself. This passive stance neglects the officer's duty to uphold departmental standards and contribute to a professional environment. It also misses an opportunity to ensure that the traffic stop is handled appropriately and without bias, potentially leaving the department vulnerable to criticism if the situation later comes to light with incomplete information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policies on off-duty conduct, ethics, and reporting requirements. Officers should always err on the side of caution and transparency, prioritizing the integrity of the department and public trust above personal convenience or the desire to avoid minor discomfort. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor is the most prudent course of action. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that a citizen has requested access to incident reports related to a high-profile arrest within the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD. The reports contain details about the suspect's personal life and information that could compromise an ongoing related investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the MNPD officer handling this request, adhering to Tennessee law? Option A. Consult with the MNPD legal counsel and the designated records custodian to determine which portions of the incident reports are disclosable under the Tennessee Public Records Act, considering any applicable exemptions for ongoing investigations or personal privacy. Option B. Release only the basic arrest details, name, charge, date, and withhold all other information, assuming it is protected due to its sensitive nature. Option C. Release the entire incident report to the citizen immediately, as all police incident reports are considered public records in Tennessee. Option D. Deny the request outright, stating that the information is confidential and cannot be released under any circumstances. The correct answer is A. Consult with the MNPD legal counsel and the designated records custodian to determine which portions of the incident reports are disclosable under the Tennessee Public Records Act, considering any applicable exemptions for ongoing investigations or personal privacy. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breach of Tennessee public records law and departmental policy regarding the handling of sensitive information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the public's right to access information with the need to protect individual privacy and maintain the integrity of ongoing investigations. Officers are entrusted with confidential information, and their actions directly impact public trust and legal compliance. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the Tennessee Public Records Act, specifically its exemptions, and consulting with the MNPD legal counsel or designated records custodian. This approach ensures that any disclosure is made in strict accordance with the law, protecting both the public's right to know and the privacy of individuals involved. It acknowledges the legal framework governing public records in Tennessee and prioritizes compliance and expert guidance. An incorrect approach would be to release the information without proper vetting, assuming it is publicly accessible. This fails to consider potential exemptions under the Tennessee Public Records Act, such as those protecting ongoing investigations or personal identifying information, and could lead to legal repercussions for the department and individual officers. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide that the information is not disclosable without consulting the relevant legal authority or established departmental procedures. This bypasses the established process for determining public record status and could be seen as an obstruction of public access, potentially violating the spirit and letter of the law. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to release only a portion of the requested information while withholding other relevant, non-exempt details. This selective disclosure can create an incomplete or misleading picture, potentially leading to misinterpretations and undermining transparency. It also fails to adhere to the principle of releasing all disclosable information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the nature of the request and the information involved. Next, they must consult the governing statutes and departmental policies. If ambiguity exists, seeking guidance from legal counsel or a designated records custodian is paramount. This systematic process ensures that decisions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and uphold public trust. Question 14. Implementation of a citizen complaint process within the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, is critical for maintaining public trust. If an MNPD officer's relative approaches the officer directly with a concern about another officer's conduct, what is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take, adhering to MNPD guidelines and ethical standards? Option A. Document the relative's concern and advise them on the proper procedure for filing a formal complaint with the MNPD Internal Affairs Division, while refraining from any personal intervention or assurance of a specific outcome. Option B. Advise the relative that due to their relationship, the complaint cannot be formally processed and suggest they seek assistance elsewhere. Option C. Immediately contact the supervisor of the officer in question and request a personal meeting to discuss the relative's concerns, bypassing standard complaint procedures. Option D. Offer a personal assurance to the relative that the matter will be discreetly handled and that the officer in question will be spoken to informally. Correct answer is A. Document the relative's concern and advise them on the proper procedure for filing a formal complaint with the MNPD Internal Affairs Division, while refraining from any personal intervention or assurance of a specific outcome. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, officer due to the inherent tension between departmental policy, public trust, and the need for efficient resource allocation. The officer must navigate the potential for perceived favoritism or bias while upholding the department's commitment to serving all citizens equitably. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions are both procedurally sound and ethically defensible, maintaining the MNPD integrity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to established MNPD policies and procedures regarding the handling of citizen complaints and requests for assistance. This approach prioritizes impartiality and due process, ensuring that all individuals are treated according to the same standards, regardless of their personal connections to department personnel. Specifically, the officer should document the request, inform the complainant of the proper channels for filing a formal complaint if applicable, and avoid any actions that could be construed as preferential treatment. This aligns with the MNPD commitment to transparency, accountability, and equal service delivery, as mandated by its internal regulations and the broader principles of public service law in Tennessee. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately dispatching a supervisor to address the situation based solely on the personal relationship. This bypasses standard complaint intake procedures and could be perceived as an attempt to shield the officer's relative from scrutiny, violating the principle of equal treatment and potentially undermining public confidence in the MNPD fairness. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the complaint outright because the individual is known to a department member. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to have their concerns addressed and could lead to perceptions of a closed-shop mentality within the department, which is ethically unsound and contrary to the MNPD duty to serve the entire community. A further incorrect approach is to offer a personal opinion or assurance to the relative that the matter will be handled favorably without following established protocols. This creates an appearance of impropriety and compromises the officer's objectivity, potentially violating ethical guidelines that prohibit officers from using their position for personal or familial advantage. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes adherence to policy, ethical conduct, and impartiality. When faced with situations involving personal connections, the primary consideration should be whether the action taken aligns with departmental regulations and upholds public trust. If a situation involves a potential complaint or a request for service, the officer should follow the established procedures for intake and processing, ensuring that all individuals receive fair and equitable treatment. Documenting all interactions and decisions is crucial for accountability and transparency. Question 15. To address the challenge of ensuring accountability and maintaining public trust following an incident involving an alleged use of excessive force by an officer during a lawful protest in Nashville, Tennessee, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD? Option A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal affairs investigation, securing all available evidence and ensuring impartiality. Option B. Publicly defend the officer's actions and dismiss the allegations based on the officer's service record. Option C. Temporarily suspend the officer with pay and await potential civil litigation before conducting a full inquiry. Option D. Rely solely on the officer's incident report and internal witness statements to determine the validity of the complaint. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal affairs investigation, securing all available evidence and ensuring impartiality. Explanation. To address the challenge of maintaining public trust and ensuring effective law enforcement, the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, must navigate complex situations involving community relations and departmental policy. A scenario where an officer is accused of excessive force during a lawful protest in Nashville, Tennessee, presents a significant professional challenge. This situation requires careful judgment because it directly impacts the relationship between the police and the community, potentially leading to civil unrest, legal action, and damage to the department's reputation. The MNPD must balance the need to uphold the law with the constitutional rights of citizens and the imperative for accountability. The best approach involves a thorough, impartial investigation that prioritizes transparency and adherence to Tennessee law and MNPD policy. This means immediately initiating a formal internal affairs investigation, securing all relevant evidence including body-worn camera footage, witness statements, and the officer's report. The investigation should be conducted by a dedicated unit trained in such matters, ensuring objectivity and thoroughness. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process, accountability, and the legal framework governing law enforcement in Tennessee, as outlined in Tennessee Code Annotated (TCA) and MNPD-owned Standard Operating Procedures (SOP). These regulations mandate proper investigation of alleged misconduct to ensure public safety and maintain the integrity of the department. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the allegations without a formal investigation based on the officer's reputation or the perceived validity of the protest. This fails to uphold the principle of accountability and ignores potential violations of citizens' rights, which are protected under both federal and Tennessee law. Ethically, it erodes public trust and suggests a lack of commitment to impartial justice. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately suspend the officer with public statements of guilt before the investigation is complete. This violates the principle of due process, assuming guilt without evidence, and could lead to legal repercussions for the department. It also undermines the investigative process and can create a hostile environment within the department. A further incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the officer's account without seeking independent corroboration or considering the perspectives of civilian witnesses or protest organizers. This demonstrates a bias towards the officer and a failure to conduct a comprehensive investigation, potentially overlooking crucial evidence and violating the MNPD commitment to fairness and thoroughness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the legal and policy landscape. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and departmental policies. Next, they should gather all available facts objectively, considering all perspectives. Then, they must analyze these facts against the established legal and policy framework to determine the appropriate course of action. Finally, they should communicate their findings and decisions transparently and ethically, ensuring accountability and reinforcing public trust. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that an MNPD officer, while on patrol in Davidson County, Tennessee, observes a vehicle being operated by a known acquaintance committing a minor traffic violation. The officer has a friendly but not close relationship with the individual. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in this situation? Option A. Approach the acquaintance, inform them of the observed traffic violation, and proceed with the standard enforcement procedure as dictated by MNPD policy and Tennessee law. Option B. Overlook the traffic violation due to the personal acquaintance to avoid potential awkwardness or perceived overreach. Option C. Engage in a prolonged, informal conversation with the acquaintance about the infraction, delaying any official action. Option D. Issue a verbal warning to the acquaintance, without creating any official documentation of the stop or violation. The correct answer is A. Approach the acquaintance, inform them of the observed traffic violation, and proceed with the standard enforcement procedure as dictated by MNPD policy and Tennessee law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an MNPD officer due to the inherent tension between departmental policy, public trust, and the potential for personal bias. The officer must navigate a situation where a direct acquaintance is involved in a minor infraction, requiring a judgment call that balances fairness, impartiality, and adherence to established procedures. The need for consistent application of law and policy across all individuals, regardless of personal connection, is paramount to maintaining public confidence in the MNPD. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a direct and transparent approach that prioritizes adherence to MNPD policy and the law. This means acknowledging the acquaintance, clearly stating the observed infraction, and proceeding with the standard enforcement procedure as if the individual were a stranger. This approach is correct because it upholds the principle of equal application of the law, preventing any appearance of favoritism or impropriety. It aligns with the ethical duty of all MNPD officers to act impartially and without prejudice, as mandated by the MNPD Code of Conduct and Tennessee state law regarding traffic enforcement. This ensures that the officer's actions are defensible and reinforce the public's trust in the department's integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves overlooking the infraction due to the personal relationship. This is ethically unacceptable as it constitutes a failure to uphold the law and departmental policy, potentially leading to a perception of corruption or preferential treatment. Such an action undermines the authority of the MNPD and erodes public trust. Another incorrect approach is to issue a warning without documenting the incident. This is also professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established reporting procedures, creating an incomplete record and potentially masking a pattern of leniency towards acquaintances. This failure to document is a violation of MNPD record-keeping policies and Tennessee law. A third incorrect approach is to engage in a lengthy, informal discussion about the infraction without taking any official action. While attempting to be friendly, this approach fails to address the infraction appropriately and can be misconstrued as an attempt to avoid official duties or to exert undue personal influence. It does not serve the purpose of traffic enforcement or uphold the department's commitment to public safety and order. Professional reasoning. When faced with a situation involving an acquaintance, an MNPD officer should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes impartiality and adherence to policy. This involves 1. Recognizing the personal connection, but immediately compartmentalizing it from professional duty. 2. Objectively observing and documenting the infraction according to MNPD procedures. 3. Applying the standard enforcement protocol without deviation, regardless of the individual's identity. 4. Ensuring all actions are recorded accurately and transparently. This systematic approach ensures that professional integrity is maintained and that the officer acts in accordance with the law and the public's expectations. Question 17. Research into the operational challenges faced by the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, indicates that officers often encounter situations requiring a balance between enforcing traffic laws and maintaining positive community relations. Imagine an MNPD officer observes a driver in Nashville, Tennessee, commit a minor traffic infraction, such as a slightly rolling stop at a residential intersection with no other vehicles or pedestrians present. The driver appears cooperative and slightly flustered. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take, considering MNPD community policing objectives and Tennessee traffic laws. Option A. Ignore the rolling stop as it is a minor infraction with no immediate danger and continue patrolling. Option B. Engage in a lengthy lecture about the severe consequences of rolling stops, regardless of the specific circumstances. Option C. Immediately issue a traffic citation for the rolling stop, citing the violation of Tennessee traffic statutes. Option D. Approach the vehicle, calmly explain the observed infraction, and issue a verbal warning, emphasizing the importance of full compliance for safety. The correct answer is D. Approach the vehicle, calmly explain the observed infraction, and issue a verbal warning, emphasizing the importance of full compliance for safety. Explanation. Research into the operational challenges faced by the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, reveals that balancing community trust with effective law enforcement is a perpetual concern. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to navigate a situation where a perceived minor infraction by a community member could escalate due to misinterpretation or lack of clear communication, potentially damaging the relationship between the MNPD and the residents it serves. The officer must exercise sound judgment, adhering strictly to MNPD policies and Tennessee state law, while also considering the broader implications for community relations. The best approach involves de-escalating the situation through clear, respectful communication and a thorough understanding of the relevant MNPD policy regarding minor traffic violations and community engagement. This approach prioritizes maintaining a positive relationship with the citizen by explaining the observed infraction in a non-confrontational manner, offering an opportunity for correction, and avoiding unnecessary escalation. This aligns with the MNPD commitment to community policing principles, which emphasize building trust and cooperation. Tennessee law provides officers discretion in handling minor traffic offenses, allowing for warnings or citations, and the MNPD policy likely guides officers on when to issue warnings versus citations, with an emphasis on proportionality and community impact. An incorrect approach would be to immediately issue a citation without attempting to understand the driver's perspective or explaining the reason for the stop. This fails to uphold the community policing ethos and can be perceived as overly aggressive or punitive, eroding trust. It also bypasses the opportunity for a teachable moment, which is often more effective in promoting compliance and understanding than a punitive measure for a minor offense. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the observed infraction entirely without any form of interaction or warning, simply because it appears minor. While discretion is important, ignoring observable violations without any acknowledgement can create a perception of selective enforcement or a lack of diligence, which can also undermine public confidence. The MNPD mandate includes enforcing traffic laws to ensure public safety, and a complete disregard for observed violations, even minor ones, is inconsistent with this duty. Finally, an approach that involves lecturing the driver extensively about the dangers of the infraction without offering a clear path for correction or understanding is also problematic. While education is part of policing, it should be balanced with efficiency and respect for the individual's time and situation. An overly long or condescending lecture can be counterproductive and alienate the individual. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate situation and the observed violation. This is followed by a review of relevant policies and laws. The officer should then consider the potential impact of different courses of action on community relations and public safety. Communication should be clear, respectful, and aimed at achieving compliance and understanding, with a focus on de-escalation and proportionality. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for an MNPD officer to take when a citizen files a formal complaint alleging a violation of departmental policy by another officer? Option A. Share the details of the complaint with other officers in the precinct to gauge their opinions on the complainant's credibility. Option B. Discuss the allegations directly with the officer named in the complaint to get their immediate perspective before any formal steps are taken. Option C. Initiate the formal internal investigation process as per MNPD policy and Tennessee law. Option D. Advise the citizen that such complaints are rarely substantiated and encourage them to withdraw it. The correct answer is C. Initiate the formal internal investigation process as per MNPD policy and Tennessee law. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for a Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, officer concerning the handling of a citizen complaint that involves potential policy violations and requires careful judgment to ensure fairness, transparency, and adherence to departmental regulations. The officer must balance the need for thorough investigation with the rights of all parties involved. The approach that represents best professional practice involves initiating a formal internal investigation process, as outlined by MNPD policy and Tennessee law. This approach is correct because it ensures that all complaints are documented, investigated impartially, and resolved through established procedures. This aligns with the MNPD commitment to accountability and public trust, as mandated by departmental general orders and the Tennessee Open Records Act, which governs the handling of public records, including complaint investigations. By following the formal process, the officer upholds the integrity of the department and ensures due process for both the complainant and the officer being complained about. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the complaint outright without a proper review, as this fails to uphold the department's duty to investigate all allegations of misconduct. This violates the principle of accountability and can erode public confidence in the MNPD. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the complaint details with the officer in question before initiating any formal process, as this could compromise the integrity of the investigation and potentially allow for the alteration of evidence or testimony. This action could also be seen as an attempt to influence the outcome of the investigation, which is unethical and contrary to the principles of a fair and impartial inquiry. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to share the complaint details with other officers not directly involved in the investigation, as this constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can lead to gossip, prejudice, and a hostile work environment, undermining the investigative process and the reputation of the department. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and procedures, impartiality, confidentiality, and due process. This involves understanding the relevant departmental regulations, state laws, and ethical guidelines governing complaint handling and investigations. When faced with a complaint, the immediate step should be to initiate the prescribed formal process, ensuring all documentation is accurate and complete, and maintaining strict confidentiality throughout the investigation. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that officers of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, responding to a call discover several items in plain view that appear to be related to a potential drug offense. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responding officers in Nashville, Tennessee, to ensure both investigative integrity and public trust? Option A. Discuss the details of the discovered items and the potential offense with other officers not directly involved in the investigation and with personal acquaintances to gather informal opinions. Option B. Disregard the discovered items as potentially insignificant and continue with the initial call, assuming they are unrelated to any criminal activity without further investigation or documentation. Option C. Immediately inform the local news media about the discovery of the items and their suspected connection to a drug offense to foster transparency and public awareness. Option D. Secure the discovered items as evidence according to MNPD protocols. Meticulously document their condition and location, and await authorization from a supervisor or detective before releasing any information to the public or media, adhering to MNPD public information policies and Tennessee law. The correct answer is D. Secure the discovered items as evidence according to MNPD protocols, meticulously document their condition and location, and await authorization from a supervisor or detective before releasing any information to the public or media, adhering to MNPD public information policies and Tennessee law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, regarding evidence handling and public disclosure. Officers must act swiftly to investigate potential criminal activity, but their actions are constrained by Tennessee law and departmental policy designed to maintain the integrity of investigations and protect individual rights. The pressure to provide information to the public or media can conflict with the need to preserve evidence and ensure a fair legal process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and legally compliant approach. This means that upon discovering potential evidence, officers must secure it immediately according to established MNPD protocols for evidence preservation. This includes proper documentation, chain of custody procedures, and avoiding any actions that could compromise the evidence's admissibility in court. Any information released to the public or media must be done through authorized channels, adhering strictly to MNPD public information policies and Tennessee's open records laws, which often have specific exemptions for ongoing investigations. This approach ensures that the investigation proceeds without prejudice, evidence remains untainted, and the department acts transparently within legal boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately releasing details about the discovered items to the media without proper authorization or consideration for the investigation's integrity. This violates MNPD policy on public information and potentially Tennessee law regarding the disclosure of sensitive investigative details, which could jeopardize the investigation, compromise witness safety, or violate the rights of individuals involved. Another incorrect approach is to disregard the discovered items as irrelevant without proper documentation or assessment, assuming they are not connected to a crime. This failure to follow standard evidence collection and reporting procedures, as mandated by MNPD policy and Tennessee law, could lead to the loss of crucial evidence and hinder future investigations. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the specifics of the discovered items with unauthorized personnel outside of the investigation team, such as friends or family. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and departmental policy, undermining the trust placed in officers and potentially compromising the investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and departmental policy. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the situation for potential criminal activity and evidence. 2. Strict adherence to evidence handling and preservation protocols. 3. Consultation with supervisors and legal counsel regarding public information releases. 4. Maintaining strict confidentiality regarding ongoing investigations. This systematic approach ensures accountability, integrity, and adherence to the law. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD, must accurately forecast its overtime budget for the upcoming fiscal quarter. Historical data from the past 6 months shows an average of 150 overtime hours per day. The department anticipates a major music festival in the second month of the quarter, which is projected to increase daily overtime needs by 50 hours for that month. Additionally, a recent departmental directive has led to a 5% increase in proactive patrol hours, which is expected to contribute to a 5% increase in overall overtime compared to the historical average. If the quarter consists of 90 days, what is the most accurate projected overtime in hours for the upcoming fiscal quarter, assuming the festival month is the 30-day middle month of the quarter? Option A, 14,512. 5 hours. Option B, 13,500 hours. Option C, 14,000 hours. Option D, 13,875 hours. The correct answer is A, 14,512. 5 hours. Explanation. Benchmark analysis indicates that effective resource allocation is a critical component of public safety operations for the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, MNPD. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to accurately forecasting overtime needs, which directly impacts budget management, officer morale, and operational readiness. Miscalculations can lead to either understaffing during peak demand or wasteful expenditure of taxpayer funds. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands while adhering to departmental policies and fiscal responsibility. The best professional practice involves a data-driven approach that considers historical trends, anticipated events, and current staffing levels. This method ensures that overtime requests are justified by actual or highly probable operational needs, specifically calculating the average daily overtime hours over the past 6 months and projecting this average forward, while also factoring in a 10% buffer for unforeseen circumstances and a 5% adjustment for known upcoming events, like a major concert series, provides a robust and defensible estimate. This approach aligns with principles of efficient public resource management and responsible budgeting, ensuring that overtime is utilized strategically to maintain service levels without unnecessary cost. An approach that solely relies on the previous month's overtime figures is professionally deficient because it fails to account for seasonal variations, long-term trends, or significant upcoming events that could drastically alter operational demands. This method is too myopic and risks underestimating or overestimating needs. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to simply add a fixed percentage to the previous year's overtime budget without considering current operational realities, staffing changes, or specific upcoming events. This method lacks the necessary specificity and responsiveness to dynamic departmental needs. Furthermore, an approach that bases the overtime projection solely on the current month's overtime, without considering historical data or future events, is also flawed. This method is highly susceptible to short-term fluctuations and does not provide a reliable long-term forecast. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data analysis, trend identification, and forward-looking projections. This involves 1. Gathering historical overtime data, 2. Identifying patterns and anomalies, 3. Incorporating intelligence on upcoming events and known operational changes, 4. Calculating a baseline projection, and 5. Applying appropriate buffers or adjustments based on risk assessment and strategic priorities. This systematic process ensures that resource allocation decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with departmental objectives and fiscal constraints.